how do you get clear on what you really want or what you really want to be? Because I think we both know that's that's typically why people get into accountability groups is they're either they do have focus on what they want and they know, but they're not taking the actions they need to do to get them there.
Hmm.
And for every one of those, we might see two, three, four or more who even have trouble getting clarity on what they really do want, right? So
Right.
it's like a muscle to build. So can you talk a little bit about either the process that you use or you use with your new team members to get clear on what they might really want?
Yeah, this goes back to the idea of your future self. And I'll preface this by saying there's a prerequisite to a lot of personal development, and that is a growth mindset.
Hmm.
A growth mindset means you believe that you are not fixed in your habits, you're not fixed in your character. You can change, evolve, and grow. That's a growth mindset.
Yep.
That's step number one. If you don't have that, then we got to go back to the basics. But assuming you have a growth mindset, then what is your future self? Who is your future self? Right? Really identifying that future self. I would even write down, describe that future self version. Whatever, some people are more visual and they can like draw it out, draw
Hmm.
that version of themselves and
Right.
how they look, they imagine themselves looking, and what kind of clothes they imagine themselves wearing, where they imagine themselves being, like
Yeah.
where do they imagine themselves spending their time visually, verbally. Maybe you just meditate on that. Some
Hmm.
people just want to meditate on that, but really get clear on what your future self looks like. Now, what's the difference between you and that future version of yourself?
Right. That gap.
That's the gap.
Yeah.
But that question, what's the difference? Because the first thing you got to do is picture that future self.
Yep.
Because if you don't, then all you're going to be doing is thinking, how am I not good enough?
Right.
Right. But if you picture your future self, the question isn't how am I not good enough? The
Yep.
question is, how do I get there?
Yep. I
Yeah.
love that. So the word that I'll typically use is speculate, right? And I'm a big fan of speculating in chunks of time. You mentioned chunks of time before in reflection. I'm a big fan of chunks of speculation into the future, right? I love to think about sort of 10 years plus
Mm.
because, and again, this is a G-rated podcast, right? But if you think in 10-year plus, you can put things on your list that I refer to as like scary shit, right? Like things that would normally scare you if you had to contemplate like how you're going to get that done in the next year or three.
Yeah.
So you can put some scary stuff on the list, things that, maybe even take your breath away when you say like, is that too big for me to think like that, right?
Yeah.
And you just put it on your list anyway. And that's part of the fun to me in speculation. But then after your tenure with, semi-scary stuff on it, then you get into sort of that 3 to 5 year chunk, which for me is starts to get really tangible and yet things that you can take action on to make happen in 3 to 5 years to be in the best shape of your life. Almost anybody in the world could do in probably 3-ish to 5 years. You might be able to do it in a year if you were super motivated, but everybody probably knows you're not going to do it in a month, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong is when they imagine themselves doing it in a month,
Yeah.
right? So this idea of speculating into the future, 3 to 5, and then the next is the year. That's probably where I get the most, what would I say, formal, right? Where it's really a reflective planning process. And that's probably, between like probably a year, a month, maybe a quarter, but a year and a month or a week and or a day are probably the most common time frames for goal setting,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I love getting things that's annual planning in business works that way. And then if you work for public companies or some other companies, the quarter is the next one. I plan in months,
Yeah.
right? I also belong to accountability team that plans in quarters. So I do plan out the quarter, but I'm more intense for my year and I'm more intense for my month. Because what I say about a month is like, this is a good chunk of time, right? And if you don't go back and reflect at the end of a month, and I also love your weekly version,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not as intentional as you are with your week, but my month guides my weeks. And again, this is all idiosyncratic, right?
Right.
There is no right way. There is no one way to do any of these things. We're both successful folks and we do things some different ways. So that's the other thing that I want the community to hear is there's no right way, because these things need to resonate with you, right? The style, the
cadence of your life. I think what you talked about about the weekly and monthly.
Yeah.
I'm the opposite. So although I do both, I don't put as much emphasis on the monthly. My monthly really is just looking back at my weekly, because I am more emphasized on a weekly basis. But there's a term Charlie Gilkey calls time horizons.
Okay.
And you have different, these are kind of what you're referring to here, time horizons or time frames. You have different goals at different time horizons.
Yeah.
You know that there are certain goals that can be accomplished in a day. Right. I mean, I'm just reiterating what you're
Sure.
saying. So as you're setting goals for your life, you start thinking about, okay, is this a daily goal? Is this a weekly goal? Or is this something that is going to take me all quarter? So yeah, I like that idea of time horizon.